this team wasn't up to the task of competing at a high level this year. And I think that Kalen DeBoer is perhaps realizing that this is going to be a more difficult task than he thought when he arrived.
Hey, welcome to Beat Everyone. I'm Ben Flanagan. It's a new year, but Alabama's season is over. They finished 9-4 after a loss to Michigan in the prestigious ReliaQuest Bowl down in Tampa. Wet Tampa, one of the ugliest games of the year for Alabama, unfortunately fitting in that they lost to Michigan on literally the first and last days of 2024. And here to look back at it, the game and the season, and look ahead is Beat Everyone producer Matt Scalici. Welcome, Matt. I mean, honestly, the less we say about it, the better. I mean, we can talk big picture. There are obviously two things that people are focused on today. Number one, Kalen DeBoer's first season as Alabama head coach. Like, what grade do we give him? Where does he go from here? Is he already on the hot seat entering his second season? And number two, Jalen Milroe's future, and if he has one as quarterback in Tuscaloosa. But look, let's start here, Matt. I mean, there's no other way to put it. That game sucked.
Yeah, one of the worst games of that Alabama football has been a part of in a very, very long time. And not just, we'll get into this, Ben, not just because it was a bad outcome and not just because of all of the frustrating things that happened during that game. I think a big part of why it was so ugly for so many people is because it was a repeat of a lot of other things that fans have watched this team do throughout the year. It was that slow motion train wreck of knowing what's about to happen, recognizing the pattern and saying, I guess we're just going to do this again. I guess we learned nothing all year.
Yeah, and to me, it was just an ugly microcosm of Alabama's struggles in 2024, right? I mean, all season long, the team really went as Jalen Milroe did. And I mean, he's the quarterback. That's true for like almost 100% of college football teams or any football teams. But a big fear of mine heading into this game was Alabama plays up and down to their competition. I mean, they rose to the occasion for huge games against Georgia and LSU, and obviously rivalry game like Auburn. They even played a close, if frustrating game in Knoxville, losing to Tennessee. But I mean, they stunk it up against mediocre teams like Vanderbilt and Oklahoma, and finally Michigan. And when Milroe plays poorly, as we've discussed on this show many times, when he makes these horrifyingly critical mistakes at the worst possible times, it buries any chance that Alabama has of winning the game. And I mean, he really must have the highest highs and the lowest lows of any Alabama player that I can remember. I mean, it really truly is feast or famine, and you really had no idea which version of Milroe that you were going to get going into this game or any in 2024.
Well, and it's exciting and acceptable to some degree to have high highs and low lows when you're a new player, when you're an inexperienced player. Part of being a professional athlete, and let's not kid ourselves, that's what all of these players are now. They're being paid to do this. But even before they were, right, they were trying to do this for a living, even before NIL. Part of that is you have to keep getting better. You have to develop as a player. You have to get rid of your worst tendencies, and you have to refine the things that you're good at. And unfortunately for Jalen Milroe, what we've seen over his 2 seasons as the starter at Alabama is no real change in any way, no development. You could argue it's gone a little backwards in some areas, but at best, Jalen Milroe's inconsistency as a passer has never improved. He completed 50% of his passes in this game. There were some really good passes. There were also a lot of not just poor passes, but passes that the receivers had absolutely no chance of doing anything with to make a play. Everything about the play was what it needed to be. The play call was right. The receiver was where they were supposed to be. The offensive line blocked and gave him time to throw it and just missed the guy. Just gave the receiver no shot at making a play. You can't do that. That is an impossible scenario for your team to find victory. It is discouraging for the entire team, and I think we saw a lot of frustration from some of the players on that offense during the game. They didn't do a very good job of hiding it. But aside from the inconsistency as a passer, aside from the inability to see the field at times in this game, aside from the ball security issues, right? All of those things. This was a game that Jalen Milroe had weeks to prepare for, right? We can't put this on the ups and downs of a season and the rigors of playing college football from week to week, like we could with the Vanderbilt game, where we said, "Oh, hey, it's just tough to emotionally recover from playing a huge game like that one week and then have to go out the next week and play another game." That's not what happened. They've had nothing to focus on except playing Michigan in this game, ostensibly, and still looked totally unprepared, totally shocked, and as though no improvements have been made. And it's tough. It's really tough to see. And this is not. I don't want to get into the territory of making judgments on people because of football, but speaking strictly in terms of being successful at this sport, it's tough to watch for Jalen Milroe. It's tough to watch for this coaching staff that has to try and go out and sell future players on the idea that if you come here, you're going to get better playing for us.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, it is what it is. Like, if you just strictly look at what happened in the game, Jalen Milroe was bad. He just was. I mean, like, he woke up for a couple of drives, right? Alabama's touchdown drive, really impressive. He was able to move the ball down the field on a couple of series, but it wasn't enough. He wasn't good enough to win the game. He wasn't anywhere close. And obviously, when you're turning the ball over multiple times, which he has shown he's had a penchant to do in 2024, you're not giving your team a chance to succeed at all. And against a team like Michigan, who's not very good. I mean, the same way that Oklahoma and Vandy, obviously competitive teams, but not very good teams, certainly not teams as talented at Alabama. And we talked about the talent gap that Alabama and Michigan would have in this game. Alabama was missing some key players. Malachi Moore didn't play. Deontay Lawson, obviously injured, didn't play. They lost Jihad Campbell for part of the game. Even though the defense, they rose up, and some of these players who stepped in for Alabama stars on the defensive side of the ball, they played well. I mean, Alabama
hard to be frustrated at all with the defense in this game. I would say a very, very impressive performance in an almost impossible position, where your offense is handing the other team the ball inside the 20 over.
So that's the problem. I mean, the offense lost the game for Alabama. I mean, you can put it all on Milroe, obviously. I mean, he had such a direct hand in some of those turnovers, right? And you're giving Michigan's, even their bad offense, which their offense was, right? Like, they were depleted too, and they weren't good even when they were full strength.
Yeah,
but when you give them the ball inside the 10-yard line, chances are they're going to score. And they had a good field goal kicker who's going to make.
Yeah, nice performance for the running back for Michigan, who had very little experience coming into the game. Had 100 yards rushing, but like, if you're the Alabama defense, you only give up 100 yards to their leading running back, and basically give up nothing through the air. They played well enough to win the game.
Yeah, and listen, like, I don't think that there's a whole lot we can say about this game. Like I said, it was a microcosm of the season.
Yeah.
And we can get into it a little more if we really want to. But I think that there are systemic things happening here when it comes to Alabama, and we can focus on two aspects of it: Jalen Milroe and Kalen DeBoer. Let's get to Kalen DeBoer in a little bit. I want to focus on Milroe because, I mean, he's the hot topic, and Alabama fans are hot about Jalen Milroe right now. And I said, the sort of, I used a past tense phrase when I talked about Milroe, like I know that New Year's Eve was the last time that we'll see him as starting quarterback at Alabama. And that's, we're unclear about that. And we'll get to that in a second. But I do want to cover one aspect of this, Matt, and, tell me if this is fair or not. I mean, frankly, I am a little disappointed in Alabama fans right now. Like, this is the worst that I can remember them treating a player publicly in recent memory. I mean, there had been offensive linemen and defensive backs who struggled with consistency like over the years, and even this year too. I mean, you look at somebody like Wilkin Formby, right? Like he was under the microscope during the South Florida game, and people said, this guy stinks, get him out of the game, whatever. But if you're the starting quarterback at Alabama, that comes with a lot of scrutiny, and that's fair. But Alabama fans have turned on this guy like Shawn Michaels did Marty Jannetty. I mean, they have kicked this guy through the barbershop glass window. I mean, Milroe, he has been the model of inconsistency this year. Like everybody knows that. I think it's partly something that we need to get into a little bit later, but I think people are really failing to read the room with this team, Matt. Like it's obviously not just Milroe, like I said before, is systemic. Like we are in a new era, and people have the same expectations for Jalen Milroe that they did for his predecessors like Bryce Young and Mac Jones and Tua Tagovailoa and Jalen Hurts. And Jalen Hurts, another guy Alabama fans turned on, and spare me your short memories when it comes to Jalen Hurts, okay? Y'all were fine seeing him go. In social media, Matt, it's not real life. I mean, there are plenty of fans who were showing the guy love. There was a great video of a fan interaction after the loss to Michigan. But I mean, if you search Jalen Milroe right now, a lot of them sound like NFL fans. Like, and in this new age, Matt, like the NIL era, the transfer portal era, players are getting paid. You said it earlier. Like, so maybe fans have a little bit more license with their criticism, and really, maybe that's fair. It probably is. But strictly from a football standpoint, Milroe has earned a lot of it. But again, I can't recall Alabama treating a player quite like this in a while, especially during the Saban era, which is a period that a lot of people don't realize ended almost exactly a year ago.
Well, you don't recall hearing it, Ben, because I believe every long-term starting quarterback, and I'm meaning like guys who didn't do a single game, every starter for Alabama under Nick Saban, I believe, won an SEC championship at some point after John Parker Wilson, and people have understanding for that situation because it was still in the building phase. This is the first time that I think you got a quarterback who, despite the fact that he did win an SEC championship last year, people still really feel like the ceiling should have been higher than it was. And if I'm going to fault the fan base, maybe that's where I do it, is to say, now that we've seen the full body of work over 2 seasons, I'm kind of amazed they even accomplished as much as they did with Jalen Milroe at quarterback, because he is obviously a player who has some pretty serious limitations, right? And maybe there's some NFL GMs and owners out there that feel differently than I do about that, and they'll take a flyer on him and say, "Well, no, we can figure it out. Whatever Alabama couldn't figure out, we can." That happens all the time. But to me, watching him, when you see the same mistakes over and over again, it's at a certain point you have to look at it and say, "That's who this guy is. That's where he's at." If he was gonna figure this part of the game out, he would have figured it out by now. And it isn't just can't get the ball to the guy physically. It's never been about that. It is that under pressure, in particular, his ability to see receivers in the field seems to go away. Reps can eventually get you past that, but this is a guy who has had a number of years playing college football at this point. Most of the time, if you're gonna develop that sense, you've had enough reps at this point to do it. So that's where I'm at with Jalen Milroe is. If I'm trying to feel sympathetic towards him, right? And I understand the frustration that comes with these guys now being paid, highly paid, okay? Making more money than 99% of the fan base will ever see in their life. So there's going to be some resentment that comes along with that. It's human behavior. But where I can find some empathy for these guys is at a certain point, you just are the football player that you are. And I used to feel, you mentioned some offensive linemen who really got it from the fan base in the past. I always felt for those guys because I thought everybody's mad at this guy because he's not good at football, or he's not as good at football as they wish he was. And I think that's kind of where I'm at with Jalen Milroe. I don't think this is – I think there are some people who want to look at it and say He's choosing to focus on the wrong things. He's spending too much time doing X, Y, and Z instead of becoming a better quarterback. I just don't think that's the case. I think that this is the player this guy is. I think we've seen it play out multiple times over the course of his career, and really going all the way back to the first start. If you think about his game against Texas A&M in relief of Bryce Young back in 2022, a multiple interception game, looked like a total mess, couldn't see the field, but had some incredible plays in that game because of his athletic ability. And in a lot of ways, that's still the guy he is right now, coming out of that ReliaQuest Bowl. So, yeah, I think the frustration is we thought he was capable of more than this. And my answer to that would be you thought wrong, I think.
Well, he is, though. I mean, he's capable of way more than what we saw in the Michigan game, in the Oklahoma game, because again, this guy looked like the best player in the country against Georgia.
It's about how you use him, and I didn't want to get into that yet because we will talk about the coaching staff.
But again, like he looks like one of the best players in the country, like a Heisman contender against some of the best teams in the country. You mentioned the SEC championship. He won that game for Alabama. He did. He controlled the clock. He controlled possession with his legs.
He got put in a position to win it. And
right.
I think that's the issue here, right? In 2024, this coaching staff decided we're going to build the entire offense around Jalen Milroe. It's all going to come down to him. Not just we're going to have some predetermined quarterback runs that are happen at key moments, key situations in the game, depending on down and distance and field position. That's not what this was. It really felt like the way that the offensive game plan was built this season was it's boom or bust. Either Jalen gets us all the way there or we're going to lose. We're going to totally fall flat.
I just don't see the imagination in the game plan, though, Matt. I mean, like you see it at times in certain games. I mean, you saw it last year when Tommy Rees was OC in the LSU game. You saw it this year to some degree in the LSU game, in the first half of Georgia game, obviously. You got to wonder if it's execution, but I don't know that Sheridan and DeBoer schemed an offense to Jalen Milroe's strengths necessarily as a runner, right? And you know, we see these design runs that, you know, these teams just snuff out instantaneously. I mean, you have people on you know, social media theorizing that Jalen Milroe is tipping plays, and that could be part of the execution issue. I don't know if that's true or not.
I think that gets overplayed.
Probably, but also something to think about. Jalen Milroe played for 3 offensive coordinators as a starting quarterback, right?
Yes,
in relief of Bryce Young, he played
it's a problem.
He played for Bill O'Brien, and they had a tumultuous relationship, which Jalen Milroe spoke about at the end of last year going into the Rose Bowl. He plays for Tommy Rees in his first year as a starting quarterback, and then there's a complete regime change when Kalen DeBoer comes in and he plays for Nick Sheridan. So you have to factor that in. But again, it's an execution issue. You can't be a turnover machine no matter who the OC is, right? I mean, listen, Jalen Milroe has won as many national championships as Bryce Young did as the starting quarterback. Bryce Young won an SEC championship. You obviously have to contextualize it, though, considering who did Bryce Young have around him. Bryce Young was the reason that Alabama won a lot of games. Jalen Milroe has been the reason Alabama has won some games, but also the reason that Alabama has lost their games this year. But look, I mean, it's bigger than that to me, Matt. I mentioned the coaching, right? I mean, Jalen Milroe, he could have had more turnovers, one after the other against Michigan. And to me, he still wouldn't have been the problem. I came away way more fixated on Kalen DeBoer than I was on Jalen Milroe after that third turnover, the same way I was after his pick 6 against Oklahoma. I mean, a coach usually knows when a player just doesn't have it that day, right? Like Milroe didn't have it against Oklahoma, nor did he have it against Michigan. And I don't know if it's a mental lapse on his part, or again, if it's a lack of imagination from Nick Sheridan, or if it's a breakdown in communication between Milroe and Sheridan, or if DeBoer just wanted to stick with his guy, especially if this was Milroe's final game at Alabama. It's a hard decision, but I mean, a coach needs to know, or at least show that he can recognize the need for a change of pace. I mean, when something isn't working, you have to make a tough decision. I mean, Nick Saban famously did it in a national title game against Georgia, and it obviously paid off. And that isn't to say, Matt, that Ty Simpson is going to come in and save the day, right? Like, it's possible that there's a really good reason that DeBoer just hasn't gone to Simpson, even when Jalen Milroe is struggling. But, I think that, Matt, this puts DeBoer and Alabama in a really tricky situation right now. I mean, similar to the SMU game, the SMU Clemson game, this was a bit of a nightmare scenario for Alabama. I mean, if Jalen Milroe has a solid day against Michigan, it all but cements him leaving for the NFL. I mean, his stock is going to go up. He's going to go to the combine. He gets drafted. That's that. It's the end of the Jalen Milroe era. But now that he's struggled in this game, he's going to get differing feedback from a lot of different directions. Some are going to tell him to go pro, and there are going to be others that are going to tell him that he needs another year of development at the college level. I mean, Jordan Rodgers said that on TV yesterday, right? So where does this put Alabama, though? Because that means more NIL money for Jalen Milroe, who has certainly lost the fan base at this point. And judging by the body language of guys like Ryan Williams and Jeremy Bernard, he's close to losing the team. And if DeBoer allows this and he welcomes Jalen Milroe back for another season, DeBoer risks losing the team too. That impacts recruiting. That impacts NIL, all of it. I mean, would that mean that maybe transferring for a strong NIL deal and maybe a starting job at another program and mitigating risk of falling in this year's NFL draft is Milroe's best move? Matt, does he stay at Alabama, go pro, or transfer? What does Jalen Milroe do? What do you think he's going to do?
If I was advising Jalen Milroe, I think I would tell him to find a college program that is a good fit for his abilities and culturally a good fit, meaning the expectations are a little bit more measured than they are in Tuscaloosa, and go play for an offensive coordinator who appreciates what you do and can put you in a position to succeed, and do that for a year. I do not believe this is a good moment for him to try and enter this draft. I think this is the one positive about it is, to me, this is a very weak quarterback class coming out in the NFL draft. You're talking about the top two guys in this draft right now are Shedeur Sanders and Cam Ward, two guys who I would say have pretty strong limitations as well. They are not day one NFL starters. These guys are risky picks, I think, to build your franchise around. And so it maybe means I don't think Milroe would get picked before either of those guys in any scenario, but the fact that those are the top two guys means this is probably a fairly weak group, and there's a lot of room to move yourself around in the draft order for teams that are looking for a backup quarterback. The issue, though, is I don't know how Jalen Milroe is going to be able to explain a lot of his film. He's going to look great at a combine because his measurables have always been great. And the issue is when he has to sit down with these teams and go through his film from his 4 losses this year, it's pretty tough stuff. And I think you need more good film out there. I think there are a lot of programs that could be a good fit for him. And it may not be the ones that you're thinking, because I think, I've heard some people toss around the idea of him going to Florida State, where he would end up playing against Alabama for Gus Malzahn as an offensive coordinator. I actually don't think that's a good fit at all. I don't think Jalen Milroe is a read option quarterback. Ultimately, he needs to be somewhere that takes advantage of his legs and does not ask him to do too much in the passing game. Keep it very simple, very limited, and don't ask him to make a lot of reads on the defense. Now, I don't know where exactly that would be, but that's what I would advise him to do. And I don't think there's any way he's coming back to Alabama, Ben. I don't think it works for either side, and I definitely don't think it works for Alabama.
No, I think that I'm not going to say it's like a 0 chance that it happens. I mean, anything is possible, but I think it's either draft or transfer at this point for him. I mean, I'm not in Jalen Milroe's head, and certainly nobody's making that decision for him other than, I don't know, 99.9% of the Alabama fan base, who have said, I mean, look, AL.com, we posted a question that said, should Jalen Milroe come back to Alabama for the 2025 season? I think that post had like 3,000 comments in like the span of an hour, and they were all, no, absolutely not. Good luck to the kid. And they're over it. They're through. They don't want to see it anymore.
I think everybody's ready to move on and to see the program go in a new direction and take on a new identity. And this has been an awkward transitional season between two eras. I think you can say the same thing about 2023, by the way. I think Saban's last season ends up, in retrospect, feeling like an awkward transition to something that nobody there was really comfortable with. And it's time for this coaching staff to handpick a quarterback that is perfect for what they want to do and work with that player on a long-term basis to develop him, develop his skill set, help him to understand the playbook and what they're trying to do philosophically as an offense, and then go from there. That's the building blocks. You need to show people what the offense is supposed to look like. You need a concept car to put in the showroom to say, if we do everything right, this is what it's supposed to look like.
Well, let's focus on the staff, or really the head of the snake, as it were, right? Kalen DeBoer, I mean, the season is over. His first season as Alabama head coach, replacing Nick Saban. It has happened. The sample size is full. He went 9-4. A lot of people going into the season, and we've talked about it here, said 9 wins was probably somewhat of a ceiling for Alabama. Others said that there's too much talent for Alabama not to play, to not make an inaugural 12-team formatted playoff, and that was in front of them. The playoff was right there. They beat Oklahoma. They beat Auburn. They walk into the playoff. And in Kalen DeBoer's first year, he's ahead of schedule. They're competing for a national championship. They narrowly miss it this year when the committee determines that their resume just wasn't good enough. And I think that we agree that the resume wasn't quite good enough to be among this absolute dud of a playoff so far. Not that it would have made a huge difference in the first round. But Matt, what grade do you give Kalen DeBoer in his first season?
I'm going to give him a D, Ben. And that's probably harsh. And there's a lot of programs where going 9-4 is one of the best seasons in the history of your program. But Alabama is not one of those places. It is without question the worst season Alabama football has had since 2007, Saban's first year. It is less explicable. It is less understandable that it happened than 2007 was, which was a team with a brand new head coach rebuilding a program from scratch that had, before his arrival, 1 5-star recruit on the roster. 1. That was it. This is a team that is loaded with talent, despite all of the transfers, and has facilities, advantages, systems in place that should give this program advantages, massive advantages over a program like Vanderbilt. And they even have some pretty clear advantages over Oklahoma and over Michigan. But they didn't look like it in those games. They looked like a team that was thoroughly average, middle of the pack in college football. They struggled to the very end with South Carolina, with the best South Carolina team in a very long time. But that is, again, I have been in the facilities at South Carolina. I know what their roster looks like. Alabama has no excuse to be on equal footing with South Carolina. And I'm sorry if it offends our Gamecock friends. It's the truth. This is a program that has every reason and every advantage to be among the 12 best programs in college football. And they just weren't this year. The bowl game further confirmed that this team wasn't up to the task of competing at a high level this year. And I think that Kalen DeBoer is perhaps realizing that this is going to be a more difficult task than he thought when he arrived, on a number of fronts, not just a football front, I think that the off-field stuff, which we talked about a lot throughout the season, Ben, but I believe when we started this podcast, one of my first thoughts that I shared about this was that Kalen DeBoer, we were going to learn a lot about what kind of coach he is when things weren't going well for Alabama. And we've got a pretty good amount of data on that at this point. Alabama has struggled some this year, and I don't think Kalen DeBoer is very good at dealing with that situation. I know there are people who will say it doesn't matter what you say publicly after you lose a game. They'll say there's nothing you can say to make people feel better. And I don't agree. I think that a big part of the job of being a college football coach is rallying the troops, is getting everybody aligned and on the same page and thinking in the same direction. And the term they like to use is alignment. And a lot of people who work in college football will tell you, if you don't have everybody in the program aligned, you can't be successful. So that's where talking comes in. That's where being a charismatic leader is important in that job. I haven't seen any of it from Kalen DeBoer. I'm not just talking about having, a great speech, a locker room speech, if you will.
You're not going to get that.
No, I'm talking about when people ask you for answers about why didn't it go well and what are you going to do about it, you better have some answers that give them confidence. And it's possible that he just chooses not to give the public any of that, and he's saving it all for Greg Byrne, and he's got great things to say internally, and everybody's buying in. I still, even if that's the case, I still think overlooking the importance of getting the fans to buy into what you're doing is a huge mistake. And Kalen DeBoer needs to figure out how to speak to this fan base. Forget the media. Where the media is just a funnel. It's a megaphone to talk to the fans through. I hear what he says to the fans. He's not doing a good job of giving the fan base confidence that he's going to figure this out and get it turned around. And actions do speak louder than words, so we'll see how the rest of the offseason goes. So far, I'm not impressed.
I think D is, at first I was going to say unfair, right? Because I think it's like, will the real Alabama please stand up? I think it's like you're talking about parallel realities with this team. If my horror fans out there will attest, it's like The Thing, Sometimes it seems like The Thing has overtaken Alabama, and you're not so sure that it's the same team that you saw
just
this past week.
Vaguely looks like it.
Yeah, exactly. And you can't really tell, but something's off, and you can't give a D to a team that beat Kirby Smart's juggernaut Georgia program, right? And that had them down 28-0. You can't give a D to a team that crushed LSU and reestablished their college football playoff chances during the season. You can't give a D to Kalen DeBoer for winning his first Iron Bowl, the first to win his first Iron Bowl since Gene Stallings, right? But
I think the Iron Bowl. I think the Iron Bowl win was important, and I will hand him that. But
it was very important.
I will say I do think that focusing only on the stuff he did right is the wrong approach.
But that's my point. That's my point. I'm saying, like, on the surface, you couldn't give a D to a guy who had done all of that in his first year. But in the context of it, they had the playoff right in front of them, Matt. Mm-hmm. And they had all this opportunity. They had all this momentum after even the Georgia win. And they go in and they lose to Vanderbilt as the number one team in the country. And then when they go to Norman to play Oklahoma, all you got to do is beat a bad Oklahoma team. And you're in the playoff in your first season. And they blew it. They absolutely blew it.
If you want to do your school grade analogy here, Ben, it's like he did really well on the test and then didn't realize there were questions on the back of the paper.
Right.
Just didn't even fill out the other half of it.
Yeah. I mean, you did well on, verbal, but your math sucked, right? So I don't know. I think that's probably a pretty fair grade because I think there are probably some people who would say it's an F for all those reasons.
And
right?
I don't agree with that because for all the reasons you just said, but also because there are good things like we had some fun this summer of Auburn fans using the epithet of Husky Harson, right? And it's seeming a lot more apt these days because of how poorly some things went this season. But there remains a couple of clear positives about the DeBoer tenure, and one of those is he continues to recruit very well. He is bringing good talent into the team. They've hit the transfer portal very successfully. Some key pieces coming to this team through the portal in the offseason. So he is going to have a roster that is arguably improved next season over what he had this year. The issue is, can he turn that into a team that can play winning football? And I think honestly, I think we have. If I'm being unfair with my grade at all, it's that I'm not giving him enough credit for the defense that truly did improve over the course of the season and was playing like an elite defensive unit over the second half of the season, and that continued into the bowl game.
Depleted unit too. I mean, because they lost Keon Sabb early.
But they played together really well.
They lost Q Robinson early. Obviously, Deontay Lawson goes down. They don't have Malachi Moore for the bowl game, and they still turn in an impressive effort. So
some
I think
young guys on that defense that really stepped up and have shown themselves to be very promising young players too. So I'm probably being a little unfair not giving that more credit and not weighting that more. The offense is a big problem, and that's your whole thing. That's Kalen DeBoer's whole thing. He's the offensive guy. He's got to get something figured out.
I think people would say they would like to see Kane Womack come back, right?
I think so.
But you're right. Kalen DeBoer has a guard up, and he's had a guard up all season. And it might just be his personality, but there's something that's not connecting with the fan base, media, if you care about that, right? Like there's just something that he's holding back. And I think he's a nice guy. And heaven forbid he get the same reputation as other nice guys in the past at this program, right? Because it didn't work out for them, right? You don't have to be a nice guy to be a successful coach, but sometimes you can be. And he did. There was a culture change that we were aware of that a lot of players, including Jalen Milroe, seemed to take to when Kalen DeBoer took over. But I think you're right. I think he has to just establish himself, and he has to establish and communicate his vision for what this program is going to be moving forward, because I think a lot of people are still kind of in the dark about what this program is. He inherited a lot. He inherited a lot of talent, and he inherited a lot of incredible infrastructure. That's true. And to be fair, we're not really going to know what a DeBoer program looks like probably until year 2. I mean, it's not fair to judge a coach in their first year. This was obviously a very unique situation where you're replacing an icon of the game, somebody who had the level of success that his predecessor did, and somebody who gave him the keys to a kingdom, right? And so who knows how other coaches would have done in a similar circumstance? Would they have even won 9 games? Who knows? But Matt, we need to move on because it's the new year. It's New Year's Day as we're recording this. So it's time to share some resolutions for 2025. How are you, Matt, changing your outlook for this new year? Are you going to go positive or negative here? What is your New Year's resolution when it comes to Alabama football, college football, whatever for 2025? Lay it on us.
Ben, you know me well enough to know that I am not in the old internet fan days, the term would have been a sunshine pumper. I am not in that category at all, but I'm not quite a doom and gloomer either. And I try to be realistic about these things. That's what I'm going for anyway. And I probably come off a little more pessimistic than most people. To me, what I'm interested to see, more so than the specifics at Alabama, is how does this sport find its footing again? I think it's a lot more than my frustration watching this Alabama team is about more than just this team. It is about the way that college football in general is changing. And that's tough for me as a older guy now, because I had an idea of what college football is and how it works, and it's changing very rapidly. And I gotta meet it somewhere. I gotta figure out what parts of this to make myself okay with. But I also don't think that the way it works right now is sustainable. I think it has to be fixed. I think there has to be some restraints put on it and some regulations coming in. And I don't know where they're going to come from. I don't know who's going to fix it. I know there have been a lot of people on TV the last few days suggesting Nick Saban, bringing up the idea of Saban being a commissioner. I don't know how many people want that. I don't know how many people even want there to be a commissioner of any kind. But this sport is very important to me and to a lot of people, and I don't want to see it completely degrade away from the thing that I loved. I understand that some things need to change about it, but we can't throw it all out. We can't be turning this into the NFL. And I'm sick of seeing so many people suggest solutions that are essentially, well, we should get rid of college overtime and do the coin flip, like the NFL does. We should make the playoffs, exactly like the NFL's playoffs. We should get rid of conference championship games. We should make this the regular season longer. Everything we're doing is to try to make this more like the NFL. I don't watch the NFL. Never. I mean, there's a reason why I prefer college football, and I hate that that all of the unique fun things about it are going away. And I would like to see that. I would like to see that slow down. I would like to see somebody step in and bring some reason to what's going on. And you know what? If it means Alabama can't go to the playoffs every year, then that's what it means. But I want to at least feel like there's some sanity in this sport, and that it is not just 60 football games every weekend where somebody flips a coin and a random result occurs.
I don't know, Matt. Look, if Alabama doesn't make the playoff, that could be a good. You sound like Jerry Maguire, right? Like when he's with Bob Sugar, Jay Moore in the restaurant. More clients, less money, right? You're fired, Matt. You know, if that's your solution.
Nobody wants what I'm talking about here. I want the sport to be more enjoyable. I'm talking for the fans here, and unfortunately, that's the least important group to this process these days.
Yeah, very true. Yeah, it's not exactly fan first. We know that. I hear you, Matt. I don't think that there should be conference championships in this current system. You know, if they're going to do it this way, I don't know what the perfect system is. I know that 12 teams are way too many at this point.
I agree.
Year one has taught us that. Yeah, it's been a total bust. They need to look. I was okay with 4. I understand the need and the desire to expand beyond that, but I thought that they had something good going for a while, and now they've kind of ruined it. But we'll see how they fix it. My resolution is this, Matt. And I hope people follow my logic here. I will stop expecting a team that is not coached by Nick Saban to play and win like a team that is coached by Nick Saban. This is a drum. This is a drum that we have beaten to tatters, Matt. Nick Saban is long gone from Tuscaloosa. They might pay him a salary. He might have an office there. He probably still even comes in and closes some recruiting deals. But this is no longer his program. So the Alabama standard, the Bama factor, make his ass quit, the process, it's over. Like the sooner that we can all accept that, like the sooner that we can actually have true clarity and move on from the greatest run that anyone has ever seen in college football. Like it's normal. I'll give fans this, like it's normal to want to carry that over into another coach's tenure. I mean, Kalen DeBoer has won everywhere he's coached. He had 9 wins in his first year at Alabama. He beat Georgia. He beat LSU. He won his first Iron Bowl. But he is not Nick Saban. And Alabama football will continue to look a lot different without him. It's kind of like death, Matt, right? Like people often wonder, what will happen? What's it going to be like when it finally happens? Probably very similar to what it was like before you were born, right? Like, just enjoy everything in between while you're awake. Okay, Matt, that was the Saban tenure. Just enjoy that. I mean, some of you lucky people out there, you were lucky enough to live through it twice. I mean, you saw Bear Bryant and Nick Saban, 2 of the greatest college football coaches of all time, They helped Alabama reach heights that no other program has ever seen or likely ever will. And some of us only enjoyed one of those golden ages. I mean, then we saw Ray Perkins. We saw Bill Curry, Gene Stallings, Mike Dubose, Dennis Franchione, Mike Price, and Mike Shula. We all know the names, right? I mean, there were amazing moments in there. SEC championships, instant classic Iron Bowls. I mean, even one national championship under Stallings, but you cannot compare those tenures to what happened under Bryant or Saban, and nor should you. What we should remember is that you lived through it and you even enjoyed it. Was it the same? No. Did it absolutely suck sometimes? Yes. But in 2025, in our case now, like one of the things here is not like the other. As we started this season on this show saying Kalen DeBoer is not Nick Saban. If you didn't know that in August, I bet you do now.
For sure, Ben. I mean, I think, and look, the shifting expectations. There's a lot of places those should come, right? I think the days of being frustrated because your team didn't win by 4 touchdowns should be gone, and that's a good example of it, right? The absolutely crushing everybody you play. That's not a reasonable expectation anymore. We're all and you know we're all going to have different opinions about what is fair to expect. I would say 4 turnovers on the first 4 drives of the bowl game is probably. I think fans are okay to expect better than that, even without Nick Saban. But what's tough is, and I think this is just the first. It happened to happen the first year without him. Expecting to never have a down season is something Alabama fans probably need to get rid of, right? I mean, this is as we said earlier in the show, this is the worst season Alabama football has had since 2007, and it was 9 wins. You don't have to look very far to find programs for whom that would be a highlight of the decade. And I'll point your eyes eastward in Auburn. A 9-win season would be a cause for a parade in the streets and a new contract to be signed for the coach. But at Alabama, that's a down year. And I think you're going to have to expect a few down years every so often. You shouldn't think that that's where the ceiling is now. You shouldn't think that Alabama can't get back to the top, but you shouldn't think that they'll be there every single year anymore. And that is tough to swallow, but it is probably a realistic way to think now.
Matt, 9 wins in your first season isn't good enough and has landed in the eyes of some people and maybe many, Kalen DeBoer on the hot seat or the warm seat, as it were. And this was his first year where you're supposed to allow for grace, where you're supposed to allow for a real transition, where you're supposed to give him an opportunity to establish himself as the new leader of this program. You win 9 games, you win rivalry games, you beat a great team like Georgia, and it ain't good enough. But it's all about the context of where you did fall short. So long way to go here for Kalen DeBoer. Here's hoping that 2025 is better for him as he, again, establishes himself and builds the program in the way that he wants to build it. But it was a tough one. I mean, spare me the bowl game stuff too. I mean, like, you should probably look at a coach's first season the same way that you do bowl games. Like, it shouldn't really matter. Context obviously matters, but I mean, I'm sick of it, right? When Alabama wins a bowl game, it's because they didn't make the playoff and they're taking it out on whoever's in front of them. Right. But when they lose a bowl game, it's because they don't care because they didn't make the college football playoff, right? And why shouldn't they phone it in? Who cares, right? So it's either one or the other for Alabama fans, and it obviously depends on if they won or if they lost. Which is it? It should probably just be neither. It's a bowl game. Who freaking cares? It's ReliaQuest, Matt. Does anybody know what ReliaQuest is? Did anybody find out while they were watching the game? I saw a couple of ReliaQuest ads.
I think it has something to do with antivirus on your computer, maybe something like that.
Oh God, what's in the corner of my screen right now, Matt? ReliaQuest is listening. It sounds like
the Bonsai Buddy again, Ben.
It sounds like, a Mission Impossible plot, right? Like Ethan Hunt and the team are fighting ReliaQuest.
The ReliaQuest.
That's
AI
right.
engine. It's an ugly one to have to leave behind you, and we will talk about in the weeks and months to come, Ben, the positive building blocks that you can take away from this season and try and focus on to say this is what they're building toward. I think a lot of people, and I'll include myself, didn't necessarily look at this season as a stepping stone to something better. A lot of people thought for a while this could be a season where something cool happened. But now that it hasn't, I think it's time to start looking at this team and saying, what did we get this year? What did we see this year that we can build on for the future?
He's Beat Everyone producer Matt Scalici. Matt, thanks for doing this, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, Ben.
Find Beat Everyone on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe to the show, rate us, and leave us a review, please. And for Matt Scalici, I'm Ben Flanagan. We will see you next time